Your mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome again, and thank you so much for being here. And this is the second session of speakers and of the second day of EMAMI. And I want to welcome to Anna. Yeah. And thank you so much. And also the other speaker, they have a personal problem. He told me, and unfortunately he cannot come, but he sent it a video. So I will start with Raul. Yeah, that actually is a friend of mine, Raul. And he was a director of a contemporary art museum in Mexico, and he has very, very interesting experience that he could share, yeah, to the conference. Raul, he's also an artist and exhibited individually and collectively in the country and abroad. He has participated in national and international congress and symposium where he has presented his research on AIDS pandemic and intersections with art. He has carried out research stays at the Center of Studies and Documentation of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona and the National Council of Plastics in Cuba, and is a research professor in the Faculty of Arts of the University of Querétaro in Mexico. So I will share my screen in just a second with the video from that Raul sent us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, David, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just a second, I'm searching the video because I have the two videos. That one is the translated version in English, and now I cannot find it.
Should I? Well.
Or Anna, please, we will start with you. In the meantime, I find the video from Raul. I'm very sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is
Anna. Should I
introduce you
first?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Anna Vernaccio is currently employed with the Bob Moog Foundation as a museum attendant at the Museum and archival assistant for the BMF archives. She has a Bachelor of Science in Museum Studies with an art history and visual culture double minor from the Rochester Institute of Technology. Her undergraduate thesis focused on the role of programming in interpreting controversial subjects for a diverse public, highlighting the value of representation and community-based programming in museums and art institutes. Title of her talk is The Role of Programming in Interpreting LGBTQ Identities in CA Museums.
So good morning. I'll be sharing my screen in just a moment. I would like to share this. As Sara said, my thesis focused on the role of programming in interpreting LGBTQ+ identities in contemporary art museums. My focus was the 2010 exhibition Hide Seek, Difference and Desire in American Portraiture, which was curated by the National Portrait Gallery and eventually traveled to the Brooklyn Museum of Art and also the Tacoma Museum of Art. I particularly looked at this instance of censorship in relation to LGBTQ issues because there was a lot of controversy surrounding the Smithsonian's response to public outcry. The particular piece of art that was in question is in the center of this piece here.
Anna, I'm sorry, we cannot see your presentation.
Oh, is it still? Hold on. Let me see. It's just showing this, isn't it? That's not what I wanted. Let me open it in.
If you open it in the browser, maybe it would be better.
I think so. I agree. I apologize for that. It's probably not the best thing to look at for a second there. Alrighty. Can you all see that now? Let's see. There we go. Okay.
Now we can see it. Yeah.
Wonderful. This is what I was talking about. I'm sorry about that. As you can see up here, here's the title of my thesis. And in the center here is still from the video artwork that was created by David Wojnarowicz entitled A Fire in My Belly from 1986, 1987. The particular clip that was highlighted by a conservative journalist and brought to the attention of some conservative congressmen was this particular image of ants crawling across a crucifix. This was highlighted about a month after the opening of the show. And the National Portrait Gallery, the secretary of the Smithsonian, Secretary Clough, opted to remove the artwork from the galleries. This was a very decisive moment in this particular controversy, and it garnered a lot of disdain and protests from other galleries and art institutions, LGBTQ groups and organizers. There was a march on the National Portrait Gallery from the Transformer Gallery a week, I believe, after the initial censorship of the work. I have a timeline along the bottom here that shows how the particular series of events progressed. Part of why I looked at this was I was interested in Kylie Message, Richard Sandel, and Nina Simone's theories surrounding the museum as a space of community discourse, being a space for social activism and political change. I looked at the programming that both the National Portrait Gallery provided to their public, as well as the Brooklyn Museum's programming, and asserted that the National Portrait Gallery, though it did do a considerable amount of programming, was not as community-centric in its outreach regarding this particular exhibition. One of the most impactful pieces of programming, which would have been Real Portraits by Ed Halter. It would have discussed queer underground portraiture in cinema. And based on my research, it was unclear if this was ever actually carried out. The collections related to this particular exhibition were somewhat limited, as some of them were restricted until 2030. And it was 2019 at the time when I was 2018, 2019, when I was doing this research. One of the other limitations of this particular research is that I had requested access to these collections shortly before the government shutdown in 2018. So I was only given a few days to go through collections and was unable to access certain other portions of the collection. So there is some limitations to this particular research. But in looking at the Brooklyn Museum's programming, one of the interesting aspects about how they handled the controversy, they received a lot of the same threats for funding, protests from the opposite side of the political spectrum, and they stood their ground, never removing a fire in my belly from their iteration of this exhibit. They also made a point to do more intentional programming that invited their community to come in and interact with members of the New York community, drag queens, local artists, people who had been a part of the ACT UP movement during the time of the AIDS crisis. So they made a very intentional step to ensure that people had a space to discuss this controversy and interpret how they were feeling and how they understood the expansive presentation of same-sex representation. Also, to highlight, this particular exhibition did not only include homosexual artists or LGBTQ artists. There were heterosexual artists and others that never really confirmed nor denied their particular sexuality or gender representation. So this was not an exhibition simply focused at highlighting one particular person. It was intended to look at the ways that throughout, from the late 18th century to the early postmodern period, different members of the artistic community showed desire, their own gender, their own sexuality, and the way that you could code those things at times where they weren't as acceptable in the public. The National Portrait Gallery did attempt to have a symposium that would address this conflict prior to it being exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum, excuse me. Their symposium, Flashpoints and Fault Lines, was 2 months after the close of the exhibit, which was considered somewhat too late to many. They also danced around a lot of the subjects, highlighting the difficulty of bringing controversial subjects into the museum, the difficulties of interpreting race and interpersonal conflicts and all these other controversial subjects, but they didn't really focus on this particular means of censorship, and they moved forward from it without really addressing it in a way that the community could feel that it was, I guess, brought to rest. And so Brooklyn, like I said, utilized more of the local members of their community and made a point to really say, come speak to us about how you're feeling, come interpret your own perspective of the world, and show us how bringing these particular portraits and this particular exhibition to you all will actually help you to be able to interpret yourself better moving forward, and create a space for other people to be able to feel comfortable and safe with you. Another quick point to highlight is that this particular exhibition actually did receive higher than usual visitor responses in their visitor surveys. There was an extensive visitor study done that included a interview portion with many of the visitors to the exhibition, as well as a survey asking people about their thoughts in relation to organization, overall themes, the explicitity of the exhibit as a whole. And many people came out saying that they actually truly enjoyed learning about the ways that different artists represented different aspects of their personal story throughout a variety of photography, portraiture, paintings, and physical sculptures. So there was a lot that was beneficial about this particular exhibit, which is often overshadowed by the censorship and the controversy that happened in 2010. So I will stop sharing my screen. And that is all.
Yeah, Anna, thank you so much for your presentation. Yeah. Now I have prepared the video from Raul. Yeah. Hope you enjoy it. Yeah.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas noches aquí en México. Es un gusto saludarlos. Muchas gracias a David por la invitación, tener esta plática, esta pequeña plática alrededor de mi experiencia en la dirección del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo Querétaro. Mi nombre es Raúl Sangrador, soy artista visual, soy académico de tiempo completo de la Facultad de Artes de la Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro, aquí en México. Y al inicio del 2023 hasta la mitad de este 2024, en agosto precisamente, tuve la fortuna de ser el director del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo Querétaro, que es una instancia que depende del gobierno estatal, ¿no? Somos gobierno del estado y fue pues un momento muy interesante. Quiero decir como un pequeño antecedente, todo esto está en Google, es fácil de encontrar, mucha información. El museo estaba en un gran problema, es decir, tenía una demanda ante derechos humanos por parte de un chique no binario que decía que había sido sujeto de discriminación por parte de la directora anterior, y por eso, bueno, el museo estaba acéfalo, no tenía dirección, estaba padeciendo una serie de situaciones, había mucha tensión en el ambiente, así que por iniciativa propia yo me autopostulé y fue aceptada mi propuesta y tuve el gusto de participar en la dirección entonces. Por eso, bueno, habría que poner sobre la mesa varios temas urgentes, entre ellos precisamente las cuestiones de los proyectos, los programas vinculados a la comunidad LGBT local, nacional e internacional. En gran medida, evidentemente no era la única preocupación, era una lista grande, pero dadas las circunstancias por las cuales había yo ingresado, era importante tener esta prioridad de atender a la comunidad LGBT, específicamente las nuevas manifestaciones que tuvieran que tuvieran relación con el arte contemporáneo. Así que, bueno, solo para a manera de introducción, he puesto aquí algunas imágenes que voy a compartir y que me gusta porque de alguna manera dan algún panorama, ¿no? De cómo es el museo. El museo es un inmueble del siglo XVII, parte de un ex convento, del convento de la Cruz, que hasta la fecha sigue en activo. Y bueno, es un museo vivo, es un museo también que se debe a su entorno, es un museo del barrio de la Cruz, que es uno de los barrios más antiguos, tal vez el más antiguo de la ciudad de Querétaro, ¿no? Y que aquí tenemos algunas imágenes, por ejemplo, en un aniversario, en uno de los aniversarios, el 5 de noviembre. Este 5 de noviembre que pasó, cumplimos 6 años, es decir, somos un museo muy joven, ¿no? Varios de estos años fueron de pandemia, lo cual ha sido, pues, una serie de sucesos que hay que tomar en cuenta para entender el entorno. También, por eso mismo, inmediatamente busqué hacer alianzas. Una de las alianzas que a mí me da mucho gusto recordar es la que se entabló con Pancho López, querido amigo y gran curador de talla internacional, que de entrada, pues trabajamos en mancuerna, hicimos una mancuerna magnífica en varios proyectos, no uno, sino muchos, pero con el que empezamos fue este de Jotolonas, que es un juego de palabras difícil de traducir, ¿no? Porque es el resultado de una serie de imágenes que surgieron de varios concursos anuales que Pancho realizó, en los cuales eran concursos de fotografía relacionados con toda la jotería, como se le dice a la comunidad homosexual aquí en México, como una especie de palabra que la gente usa, joto para decir homosexual, y entonces las palabras jotolonas, porque además las fotografías estaban impresas en lonas, entonces eran las jotolonas, y con eso hicimos nuestra primera exposición en el Museo de Arte Contemporáneo. Fue fantástica porque aunque era una exposición pequeña, era además la muestra de muchas mentes, de muchas maneras de observar la imagen, ¿no? Paralelamente también hicimos esta exposición del Consulado de Sodoma, ¿no? Coordinada por Ricardo Belmore, que es el director de Anal Magazine, y que de alguna manera esto de Consulado de Sodoma tiene que ver con un proyecto que él realizó en Guatemala, donde hubo una crisis, donde se estuvo a una rayita de criminalizar la homosexualidad, aprovechando la crisis de la erupción del volcán de fuego. Entonces, Ricardo Belmore hizo presencia allá en una galería donde de manera improvisada se declaró el Consulado de Sodoma, donde la gente homosexual podía tener diálogos, observar las imágenes que llevaba como parte del archivo del Anal Magazine Ricardo Belmore, y tener una serie de eventos que de alguna manera defendían a la comunidad. También hemos recibido algunas propuestas de organizaciones locales, como en el 13 encuentro de la diversidad sexual, ¿no? Y que en esa ocasión fue en junio del 2023, hicimos esta presentación de experiencias del consumo de cristal, de alguna manera por iniciativa de Valerio Gámez, con las intervenciones de Tomás Flores y Juan Pablo Caicero, y que fue un conversatorio donde se habló de la experiencia del consumo de cristal como una problemática importante dentro de la comunidad LGBT en la actualidad a nivel global. También hemos recibido distintos colectivos, el grupo que organiza la marcha LGBT anual aquí en la ciudad de Querétaro, escogió el museo para hacer sus ruedas de prensa. Siempre han sido bien recibidos, ¿no? Y es un gusto para nosotros que además el museo hubiese tenido esa proyección. Hicimos un trabajo importante, de modo que el primer año fuimos nominados dentro de esta sociedad Gorrita Azul, que parecía como un meme del Facebook, y de entrada así fue, pero que con el tiempo, con los años, se convirtió en un proyecto maduro donde intervenían bastantes patrocinadores, instituciones privadas y públicas que hacían una especie de evento donde se nombraban a los 5 mejores curadores, a los 5 mejores exposiciones, a las 5 mejores artistas, etcétera, etcétera, y también a los 5 mejores museos a nivel nacional, y estuvimos nominados. Quiero decir que con muy poco presupuesto, dadas las circunstancias del gobierno del Estado, donde había una serie de proyectos urbanos, ¿no?, de vialidad importantes aquí en Querétaro, había muy poco presupuesto para cultura, como de manera muy recurrente sucede, es lo primero que sale digamos, del presupuesto, y aún así fuimos nominados en este proyecto de Gorrita Azul. Me dio muchísimo gusto, porque bueno, no era poca cosa, ¿no? En realidad eso daba testimonio del esfuerzo en el que hicimos obras, hicimos eventos de primer nivel. También, y bueno, como me estoy enfocando solo en los que tuvieran relación con la comunidad LGBT, también de comentar que hicimos por ejemplo, esta proyección de 120 latidos por minuto a propósito del 1 de diciembre, Día Mundial de la Lucha contra el SIDA, donde también se recordaban algunos movimientos aquí en México, como todo el proyecto del taller de documentación visual de la Academia de San Carlos, perteneciente a la UNAM, la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Personalmente también he tenido el gusto de pertenecer a redes de investigación internacionales, como que surge a partir de la red de la búsqueda de las masculinidades disidentes, dirigido por Rafael Mérida, con sede en la Universidad de Lleida, en Cataluña, pero que en esta ocasión, en el 2023, del 9 al 11 de agosto, fue sede del Museo de Arte Contemporáneo, ¿no?, de este congreso, donde recibimos personas de España, Costa Rica, de manera virtual también estuvieron gente desde Alemania, desde Australia, desde Francia, ¿no? Bueno, y de manera local, de Puebla, de Veracruz, de la Ciudad de México, etcétera. Bueno, nos dio mucho gusto, digamos, este evento fue fantástico. A su vez, también hemos tenido algunas presentaciones de libros, como esta de Con la sonrisa en los labios, de Francisco de Hoyos, que es una persona muy importante, relevante a nivel nacional, por haber sido el promotor de varios artistas de relevancia histórica, como Enrique Guzmán, ¿no?, por ejemplo, y que cuenta en esta autobiografía Con la sonrisa en los labios toda la historia de esos años, de la construcción de la galería y lo que estaba alrededor del ambiente. Aquí en la presentación con el doctor Sara, ¿no?, quien también era amigo de Enrique Guzmán y de Francisco de Hoyos en aquellos años. Me dio mucho gusto. También hemos tenido algunas otras presentaciones, como varias novelas de Fernando Yacamán, o esta de Tecnologías de Eros, de León A. Damián, y algunas también, por ejemplo, este taller de escrituras queer que impartió César Cañedo, ¿no?, lo cual no es poca cosa, porque César Cañedo, aunque es muy joven, es una de las grandes promesas de la poesía en México, no solo de la poesía LGBT, de la poesía en general, ¿no? Y eso también es algo que de pronto ahora haré algunos comentarios, y cerramos también con algunas presentaciones, por ejemplo, de video de arte joven de Panamá, donde también estaba Milko Delgado, que se enfoca específicamente en las cuestiones de VIH. No es el único en hablar de las cuestiones queer, pero particularmente me parece relevante el trabajo de Milko, de todos las personas que estuvieron participando desde Panamá. También fuimos, a partir de esto, invitados a algunos conversatorios importantes, por ejemplo, con Las Picudas, donde interviene Blanca González Rosas, una de las críticas de arte más importantes de México, y tuvimos algunas presentaciones como esta de La Manuela, una de las primeras representaciones de la figura del travesti, no solo del cine mexicano, a partir de Lugar sin Límites de 1978, dirigida por Arturo Ripstein, sino que a su vez también fue referencia del taller de documentación visual de la Academia de San Carlos, de quien ya hablé. También tuvimos algunas otras exposiciones, como esta de Mercedes Gertz, Cuerpo Emocional, donde hablaba, ella misma tejía algunas prendas para personas no binarias y que de manera lúdica generaba, digamos, esto de reflexión alrededor de las personas y no binarias y el público general, ¿eh? Eso era lo que me parecía muy importante, tener estos diálogos. También tuvimos algunas presentaciones con la comunidad trans y algunas, después ya también en el 2024, en julio, en el mes LGBT, tuvimos esta exposición de Valerio Gámez, donde se aterrizaron algunos conversatorios, como este de Chemsex, ¿no? Nuevamente, quiero comentarlo también como algo importante, que yo proponía algunas otras dinámicas, algunos eventos a propósito de la exposición de Valerio de Chemsex, pero he de comentar que también, pues algo que habría que reflexionar, son estas actitudes un poco flexibles de la comunidad LGBT, de la comunidad artística en general. Me quedo con esa gran premisa, la comunidad artística que uno pensaría que es como de otro nivel de entendimiento, que es abierta, que es tolerante. No, nada de eso ocurre. Aquí en Querétaro, o por lo menos en mi experiencia, tuve un terrible dolor de cabeza de manera frecuente por la intolerancia y por el poco entendimiento, el diálogo, el egocentrismo de gran parte de la comunidad LGBT. Hay un movimiento importante, por ejemplo, aquí del ballroom, que de alguna manera curiosa, que yo con mucho respeto no termino de entender, que se proponen como un movimiento de ruptura cuando hacen una referencia, número 1, a la serie televisiva de Pose, número 2, al fenómeno neoyorquino de los años 90, que surgió en plena crisis del SIDA, y ahora nos lo presentan como algo novedoso. Yo intenté dialogar con ellos, pero no hubo manera, no hay manera. Tienen una postura radical, intolerante, autoritaria, y esa es mi gran preocupación en el sentido de hacia dónde entonces se va a encaminar. Hay mucho que hacer en este sentido de abrir el entendimiento de la comunidad en general, que el arte en gran medida fuera el escenario seguro donde esto ocurriera, donde estos diálogos sucedieran, pero lamentablemente la comunidad LGBT aquí en la ciudad creo que necesita madurar, está en un momento de gran egocentrismo, también lo digo por todas estas exposiciones y que en las cuales hubo poco diálogo o nulo diálogo, no solo entre artistas e instituciones gubernamentales, sino entre artistas y artistas mismos, entre colectivos. Yo hice convocatorias para que vinieran todo mundo y me propusiera proyectos para realizar. No llegó nadie, es decir, no llegó nadie. Y hice esta invitación a los chiques del ballroom, no vino nadie. Es decir, pero después sí se quejaban de intolerancia y de poco presupuesto, y se hicieron una serie de reuniones en las que en todo caso terminaban, bueno, ¿y a quién de nosotros pondrás en puestos de poder? A la Secretaría de Cultura de ese momento, ¿cuánto presupuesto nos vas a otorgar? Una serie de situaciones que tendríamos que reflexionar. Yo no quiero decir con esto de demeritar las luchas importantes, necesarias, de vida o muerte, que en muchas ocasiones suceden no solo en México, sino en el mundo entero, pero que lamentablemente son opacadas muchas veces por las visiones parciales y egocéntricas de ciertos grupos que, por lo menos hoy por hoy, en Querétaro, he de decirlo como exdirector académico y artista en activo, falta mucha madurez en ese sentido. Yo creo que es la gran premisa con la que habría que quedarnos. Bueno, el tiempo es muy corto, no me puedo extender más, es una promesa que le hice a David. Les mando muchos saludos, muchas gracias por su atención y cualquier cosa quedo atento por las redes sociales. Quien quiera seguirme, estoy en Facebook, en Instagram como Raúl Sangrador, Raúl.Sangrador. Muchas gracias y hasta luego.
That was the video, the message from Raul. Yeah, that was he has a very, very interesting inside perspective. Yeah, from a high level cultural institution in Mexico and the relationship with this all LGTB groups and communities, and he gave us his feelings, his perspective, his experience, and also Anna with their experience, what they have, and then the research he made in his thesis. So the questions are open.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Raul is not here, but Anna can help us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anna. And I really enjoyed it. Actually, I have a question for you, but first I have to read our Q&A section. Mark said, Richard Sandel is a great friend of mine. We have worked together on EDI for many years. He's fantastic and his work is phenomenal on EDI museology. Also, he added Richard Sandel has done extensive work on museum EDI in Central and South America. He is a global professional on museum studies, specializing in EDI from the University of Leicester, I guess.
Mhm.
I recommended people looking into his work, especially in South America, and he said I can even make the introduction. Also, Hugo said, congratulations, Raul. And also, I want to add, Raul's work was really fascinating, I think. I really wished he was here with us so we could ask him some questions, but maybe we should reach him through his social media that he mentioned. But Anna, I have a question for you. How the artist got paid, the artist that you, Richard Sandels was his name, right? The artist Richard Sandel, how he got paid, it's one question. And my another question is that, I don't know, maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but was it the first ever exhibition, like LGBTQ exhibition that the museum had? Or were there like a history?
So, the United States had a series of what we call the 1980s and 1990s culture wars, which focused around a number of different LGBTQ exhibitions and other controversial art that was exhibited in different museums. One of those includes Robert Mapplethorpe. And that was at the Corcoran Gallery when it traveled through a few different galleries, and that was one of a similar kind of string of exhibitions. Hide-Seek was really groundbreaking in the fact that it took all these different artists who had been exhibited for probably hundreds of years now at this point and put them all in a gallery together. And so they looked from the late 18th century or 19th century, 1800s to the postmodern period. So you had individuals like Keith Haring, Robert Mapplethorpe. You had earlier examples like Sara, I'm mixing up that name. But there were a very large, expansive, and unique exhibit. It didn't just focus on one means of portraiture. It wasn't just traditional portraiture, like Eight Bells Folly. I can't remember the name of the artist off the top of my head, but that particular piece was a very abstract, almost expressionist piece that was done in mourning for the artist's lover. And so they took a very expansive look at the way that LGBTQ coded representation has informed the way that artists actually look at representing themselves. Because you also have individuals like Andy Warhol. There's a image in this particular exhibit of him in drag. They had his traditional images of himself, like the camouflage self-portrait, and other ones that kind of showed the different ways that he spoke about identity, but it also brought it back to, you know, this is the way that you can portray yourself, and this is the way that other people can choose to portray you. There was a piece which was a portrait of Marcel Duchamp, but in that particular piece, he's just a floating androgynous head. And we know Duchamp is, as far as most know, a heterosexual artist, but he was able to get into drag. There's an image that was also included in Hide Seek, which was a portrait of him as his alter ego, Roro Sauvé. So he... Jonathan Katz and David C. Ward made a point to make this a very expansive and groundbreaking exhibit. And the controversy is very much so something that overshadows the work that they did for that particular exhibit. To answer about Richard Sandel, so Dr. Sandel is a professor, I believe, in the Museum Studies program, particularly looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. He has written a number of books regarding human rights in museums and how to speak to social equity and equality in museums. So I referenced his material because when I had to do my literature review for this thesis, I was looking at a number of different members of the community that had much more authority than I did at the time, and still have much more authority than I do. But they informed a lot of my understanding of what I was reading about and how I also personally perceive our role as museums. To clarify, I currently don't work for the Bob Moog Foundation, but when I did, I tried to highlight to them the importance of the members of the community that weren't just progressive rock musicians. A lot of people who utilized Moogs in the 60s and onward were members of the African American jazz community, members of soul, members of country. You know, there was a variety of different people. One of the very early engineers on Moog systems, Wendy Carlos, she was a member of the LGBTQ community. So a lot of people come in asking these questions about, you know, who are these members of my community that bring me into this space and relate this information back to my story. And so, you know, I tried to remind us oftentimes when we were creating more exhibit content that it's important to say, you know, these are some of the really impactful people who are the reasons we have some of this technology. Part of the reason we have auto-tune nowadays is because of the Moog synthesizer, but in particular, that was not just Dr. Moog who did that. There were other individuals who built on his engineering in order to bring it up to what we now know, and other artists who then expanded on the use of that from that original person who created it to bring in, you know, new forms of EDM or expressive contemporary music or whatever. So that's part of the reason I reference Dr. Sandel, is because that space that we create for these discussions, that openness to saying, hey, you know, you might not have been a part of this dialogue at one point, but we know that you were a part of this dialogue through these little things that we can see, whatever telltale signs we have, you know, then we can move forward and engage people in those dialogues and help them feel included by the museum and want to continue coming back as a part of our constituency. So I hope that answered those questions.
Thank you so much. Great work. Yeah, you did what we were talking about, like expanding the scope of the museum to the people who think they don't belong there, and making that museum the place you can belong.
Yeah, I'm a little curious, yeah, because when the artists come to the museum, what they were showing, it's not a fact that they know that is everybody know that is homosexual or not, and nobody asks, are you? I don't know, and this kind of exhibition specialized in this college, so these LGBTQ topics, it makes them, I don't know, it had the feeling that they also has some, besides something like okay, we are others, we are special, and not we are seeing like everybody, like everyone else, and this is something like okay, you are there. This is the otrotiedad, I don't know how to say in English, the other. You are there and I'm here.
Yes.
You are, and this is something like we are here, that we, instead of you and me, and this is the kind of I don't know if it's really healthy to have this kind of exhibition that are specialized on that.
I think one of the great choices that was made in this particular exhibition is they didn't expressly want to only have LGBTQ artists. So Georgia O'Keeffe was highlighted for her representation of sexuality. They referenced Jackson Pollock in a lot of the didactic text to talk about his hypermasculinity at his time and the way that influenced modern art. So they didn't try to make it as much an us and them. They wanted to highlight the different means that people had for expressing some of their coded like aspects of themselves, their personality, but also their sexuality and their gender, because, at the late 1800s, in the early 19th century or early 20th century, you couldn't really just be transgender. You couldn't really just be in a relationship with LGBT, like with another man or woman, depending on what your gender was. And one of the things that Jonathan Katz talks about, there are still on YouTube, if anybody's interested, there are still introduction clips to the Hide-Seek exhibition and a walkthrough of the gallery and things related to the symposium. And he talks very intentionally about how one of the very first pieces when you walk into the space, it's an image of a boxer. And most individuals would just see it as a bunch of men watching a boxer, and that's about it, right? But they were interpreting it to show you where the gaze of the two individuals behind the boxer were on his buttocks. And so it was to speak to, you don't have to be express about your sexuality or your gender. You can have little coded ways of speaking to others about who you are without fully ostracizing the main community. And so it's reminding us that even though we're a little different, we can all kind of coexist. And I think that it's difficult too, because they do eventually get into the AIDS crisis. And that's where we get into a lot more division based on misinformation about the severity of AIDS or how people were getting AIDS or all that kind of stuff. And at that point, you start getting into even more political artwork. And one of the particular clips that's on YouTube as well talks about the difference between a photograph from David Wojnarowicz that was still kept in the exhibition after A Fire in My Belly was pulled, and Felix Gonzalez Torres's portrait of Ross in LA. And so those two particular images, if you look at the two, one is actually a sculpture of candy. It's 175 pounds of candy that is meant to represent Felix Gonzalez Torres's partner. And the the public that comes to see it is meant to be implicated in the slow decay of that pile, because as you take one, you are seeing the way that AIDS took away the love of his life. And Wojnarowicz was very much so on the opposite side of it. It's a photograph of him buried under dirt, simulating as if he was in a grave. And that was speaking to, he doesn't know how much time he has left. He actually passed from AIDS himself. So, it's difficult because as we get into the postmodern era, everything becomes more and more politicized, and that's as we become more and more separated. And I think the ways that we move forward are having these discussions about, people in the 80s and 90s didn't realize what was happening to a whole lost generation. And so many people lost people that they cared about, that were, the love of their life, that were people that meant a lot to them. And so, that's where I think it becomes harder for people on opposite sides of the spectrum to try to meet in the middle. Because when you keep saying that my partner got it from doing horrible things, and my partner got it from something that they didn't even know about, that's when people start to not be able to see eye to eye, because the conversation then becomes a them and us, as David was saying, instead of a how are we as a global community or a local community or even a national community going to make a change that will benefit us moving forward. So I think it's a difficult conversation to have, but without having it, you can't really move forward and understand the others that are around you. So
yeah, totally right. I mean, I have this because I didn't remember quite well all these AIDS, where there was this AIDS pandemic, and I just saw this movie from Trump, the life of the biography of Trump, The Apprentice, I think it's
mm-hmm.
And then he was very scared that that his mentor, he was sticking the AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
and he was with the doctor. And the same was with now with this corona pandemic. Also, the people was totally scared from the people that was not vaccinated. There was some kind also of discrimination of the people that was not vaccinated or the people that was vaccinated. And the people is still very sensitive with this topic. But anyway,
I think the curation in itself was an artwork. I really liked everything about it that you just said. I didn't know it existed actually before you talk about it. But I think that really there was something for everyone in there. Like if you're a woman, if you're a man, like see there are other ways to see yourself, and are other ways that people are like a bunch of different ways that people can see you. First time I encountered, like I forget the name of the artist, but there's a box with a fair all over it. After the movement that there were all white male, they were building like these boxes in the modern era in different shapes and stuff. And then a woman came and like a female artist made this box with fair. In that moment that I felt, oh, it really resonated with me. Like it's a little different for me living in a really male-centered society, and I didn't even know that I can feel that way about a box with a fair, but it felt like it's home in some way. So really amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. Yeah, and I think we will have a 5 minutes break, and then we will continue with the next speaker session with the last of this day. Yeah, we can stay here, and then yeah, we see us in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Okay, great. So now we will start our last round of the speakers. Yeah. Chris and Mark, if you want to enter in the stage to present you. Yeah.
Introduce Chris first.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Christine. I cannot pronounce last name, so sorry. Chris is a performance studies scholar and artist. Her work focuses on transnational exchange through performing arts curation. She writes about art and performance for academic and general audiences. Her work has appeared in Performance Matters, Sightlines, and Glassfire, among others, and she has been a writer in residence for Fields Bikes Festival, a time-based arts festival at Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, Concept Animals, and Deeply Fascinating. As a teaching artist and social practitioner, she has worked with the High Moiety Universities, High Museum, Alliance Theatre, the Blanton Museum of Art, the Visual Arts Center, the Kitchen, Moiety, and universities through the United States. She holds a PhD in performance studies from the University of Texas at Austin with certificates in LGBTQ plus studies, museum studies, and integrated behavioral health. And the title of the talk is Implementing Change, Implementation, Measurement, and Accountability for DEIA programs.
Chris, welcome. Thank you so much being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I share a presentation?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Let's see if it works. Oh, that was not the right thing. I'm sorry.
I think you have to open it with the browser.
Is that working?
Now. Yeah, now it's working.
Okay. Thank you. So my presentation today is on Landmarks, the public art program at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm using that as a case study to talk through how folks might implement a DEIA or equity plan for a collection. So Landmarks is a percentage for the arts program, which for folks, I don't know if this is a common thing around the world. In the United States, it's rather common for public monies to a small percentage for any new building project or construction project to be set aside for the commissioning of art. So this program, between 2 to 5% of any new build project or renovation project at the university is dedicated to a fund for creating art on campus. And Landmarks is the institution on campus that facilitates that creation and curation of that art. The University of Texas is the second largest university in the United States. So it's a huge campus with a lot of money. The program is really highly esteemed because it has a lot of really famous works of art and the budget is really big. For example, the last work that was commissioned by Sara Oppenheimer was in the millions of dollars. So it's a really large budget to work with for a university art program. The collection was started with a long-term loan from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So there are about 12 or 13 pieces on loan from the Met that are stationed throughout campus that started this collection. In addition, there are about the same number of pieces that have been commissioned or bought since this program was started and placed across campus. because the collection started with a a loan from the Met, the representation in the collection skewed towards white men. The curator that chose works from an art historical perspective. So they chose works that represented different sculptural moments throughout history that they thought would be useful for art history students, which was a really lovely perspective, but turned out to not be the perspective that we wanted to use in 2020 and 2021 when we were thinking about how the collection was going to engage students. I also need to tell you all that the data sets that I created for this program don't exist anymore because equity work like this is no longer legal in the state of Texas for any public institution. So I had hoped that I would be able to share some of like the back end data that on how I created this program, but unfortunately, those documents are no longer available because this program has stopped, this equity program, and they have had to refigure the way that they're curating the program to make sure that they don't mention diversity, equity, or inclusion in any of their planning because it's illegal at the state. So the university and any other public entity is no longer allowed to have a DEI focus. And so to get started on this, we had a student complain about one of the works of art. They thought the title of the work was racist. And so we looked into the title of the work, and this sort of catapulted an entire review of the collection and our policies. And we got together with several different organizations across campus. And looks like there's a new question. Yeah, DEI being illegal is totally crazy. But that's the world we live in here in Texas now. And I think it might be useful to think about this stuff for anyone else that might be in places where this type of work is controversial. It can still be done. It just can't necessarily be talked about in the same way as we're used to talking about it. But I think for the framework of trying to put together a program, it's good to use these terms. And then at the end, we can talk about like how you might change that lens for people that don't think that that's an important thing to focus on. So we worked with the president's office, a lot of minority groups on campus. We created a working group, an advisory board, and a staff board to work on assessing our collection and our practices and creating change. So the first thing that we did as a team was define our terms. So we decided that we wanted to look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And we spent about a month working with our different constituents to define these terms for ourselves and what they meant for our collection, for our staff, for our audiences. And I think it's important to create your own definitions of these terms because it will really help make them actionable because they're specific to your organization. So I'll start with diversity and how we were thinking about who we wanted to serve. And for us, that was university students, university staff, faculty, and the public, and potentially people that might be wanting to access the collection online that couldn't be able to come to campus. So those were our core audiences. They're pretty broad, but for us, it was our mission is to serve the students of the campus. So it was a pretty easy for who that group of people is at the top of our list of who we're trying to serve and reach and represent. So the first thing that we did was assess our collection. What type of identities are represented in the collection? So these categories will change for you. The The ones that we looked at were race, ethnicity, gender, class, education, ability, sexual orientation, nationality, and age. Other organizations might also want to look at religion. Since we are a state institution, religion isn't something that we can legally broach. So that we didn't bring that into play, but for a lot of other organizations, religious identity can be really important for your audiences. So I created a spreadsheet that I was hoping to share with you that I can't, that assessed all of the identity markers of the people that were in our collection. I had several interns working with me. And these identity markers, we only counted them for people when they were readily accessible. There are many people who don't publicly identify their sexual orientation or their gender, or you may not know their class background. But we did the best we could to find this information, and we didn't share this publicly. This was only information for us to make as good of an assessment as we could. Because if you share this type of information publicly, you might be outing someone. There were several queer artists in our collection that I knew as queer artists, but other people on our staff didn't necessarily know as queer artists. And so we had a lot of conversations about, like, how do you know if someone's queer? And, like, is it okay to talk about that in public as, like, we have queer artists in the collection? And so there was a lot of education around, like, how to be careful and mindful of people's identities. So we only made public the information that any of the artists identify themselves as part of their artistic practice. So Sarah Oppenheimer, who I had mentioned before, is a queer artist, but her queerness is not something that she puts into her practice. So we didn't want to make that a public part of the way that we were talking about her work, since that's not a way that she talks about her work. But on the back end, we wanted to note that that is someone that represents the queer community in our collection. So once I collected all of that data, we compared it to 3 different data sets that we identified as core audiences for our demographic. It was the state of Texas, the city of Austin, and the university. And so we tried to find as much data on the breakdown of all of these different identity markers for all 3 of those different demographics. And then we averaged them and compared them to our collection. And this is how we created a plan for how we wanted to diversify the collection. And for any identity marker that was a small percentage, we just marked that we wanted to add at least one of those identity markers, because even if they're not taking up a large percentage of the collection, since it's small, we wanted to be able to represent as many different identities that are part of our community as possible. And then the next thing that we did was assess the equity of our collection and our organization. We looked at who had power, who's on our board, what's the makeup of our staff, how much power do visitors have, does the press really engage and shape the way that our organization is seen. And this is going to be different for your organization. Our board and our staff have a lot of power. And in addition, the regions of Texas have a lot of power because we're a state university program, which is pretty unique. But this law that I just mentioned to you is something that was passed by the legislature. So the legislature actually holds a lot of power over decision-making at the university. So once we made that assessment, we made a plan for how we wanted to make sure that different voices from our community were represented on our board, our staff, and we have no control over the regions or the university. So those were the 2 things that we really focused on. And then also on making things more accessible for visitors with different identity markers. Our organization was largely white and largely identified as, like, cisgender women who are straight. So we wanted to make sure that we really diversified through our hiring practices and also inviting people from different communities onto the board. So those were some of the first steps that we took to try to assess the inequities within our staff and board. And then next, what we did was think about inclusion for our program. It's a public art program, so all of the art is, most of it's outside, some of it is inside of university buildings. It's completely free. It's open to the public. That being said, there are many barriers to access for the collection. The university is huge. It's several acres. Parking is really difficult. The weather here is really hot, so it can be unbearably hot for much of the year to be outside looking at these works of art. And if you have mobility problems, it's also very difficult because some of these works of art are literally miles apart. So we were thinking about physical access, and then we were also thinking about who are we inviting? Who are we making an effort to reach out to? Is it just university students? What about staff? What about community members that aren't related to the university and like don't have any relationship with universities and might not feel comfortable? And then we also were wondering what's our ideal community? In addition to these demographics, like ideally, who do we see engaging with the work that differently than it is now? And so one of the things that really came out for us was that there's a huge population of English as a second language students on campus. And the two main languages that students that speak are Spanish and Mandarin. So that became something that we were really interested in. We're like, if people are not able to access the wayfinding in our website and the information about the collection in a language that they can read, then we're really not making it accessible to them at all. And some of the other things like the physical barriers, we had to decide like how much we could affect change on those. So we made different wayfinding. We made notes on our website about how hard it is to get to some of the places, but we can't change the buildings. We can't change parking. So we really wanted to focus on things that we had control of as landmarks. So some of those things that we were looking at were our web presence. We translated our website into simplified Chinese and Spanish. We created accessibility for people with visual impairments. We put Braille on our signs. We also created QR codes for all of the signs for the collection that go to an app that is in multiple languages and has audio guides for visually impaired people. And some other things that you might think about are ticketing. There's no tickets to any of our programs. It's completely free. So that wasn't something that we had to really focus on. We were really struggling with accommodations for people with disabilities because there aren't a lot of options on campus. So we came up with some ideas about how to find the best tour routes that were most accessible by wheelchair, and also different accommodations on campus for people with mobility issues that are offered by the university that we could then offer to our patrons. So after discussing all of those things, we created a strategic plan. And the way that we broke it down was with 6-month goals, 5-year goals, and 10-year goals. I've included here the Management Center's worksheet for SMARTY goals. This is a really concise way to make really great, doable goals for your strategic plan. You can also have each member of the board create their own SMARTY goals for themselves, and then you check in on these goals. So I would love to have the strategic plans to share with you. But some of the things that we put on ours were how we were going to diversify the collection. So we made a plan for the artists that we were going to commission for the next several years, and some of the identity markers that we wanted to hit to represent our student population better. We also made goals for our hiring so that when new members of the staff joined, we could be representing different voices, and how we hoped that different representation would change the board and change the staff. And then we made goals for the language translation, the app, some of these more tangible things that we could create deadlines for. So I created this app for the organization that, I gave myself a year, and then we launched it in the year. And so it was really easy to measure that and come back to it and say, okay, we're meeting this goal. And then when we met that goal, then we created new goals for how we might improve the app to make it even more accessible. And this is just kind of like a reminder, everything has to be doable, especially in a budgetary sense. We luckily had a really big budget for our program. Not everyone has that opportunity, and there's always acquisition money, since it's a percentage for the arts program and the University of Texas is constantly growing. There are new projects in the pipeline for this program every year. So we were able to change the makeup of the collection almost immediately. Since I think they've commissioned 4 pieces, and they've all been from folks from different backgrounds than the people that were represented in the collection. You also have to consider your time. My job when I was doing this work was the coordinator for education. So equity wasn't a part of my job description. So we had to rewrite my job description to make this equity work a part of my job description, so it was doable within the scope of my job, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do both my education job and also my equity job. So we rewrote that so that I would have the time to do both, because as an organization, we decided that this was a very important component of the program. And as I mentioned, laws and regulations really can limit your ability to make some of these changes. The university has a whole set of laws around what can and cannot be done on campus, and also the organizations that we worked with. So everyone from say if the building that's being built is an engineering building, sort of the core team working on that build project also has a say in this artwork, and how it's commissioned, how it's installed, how the money is spent. So we had to really work together with all of the different constituents on campus to get them on board with the works of art that we wanted to add. And then we also had to make a case for why they're relevant to that particular project. And then the last thing that I think Landmarks we could have done better with is just keep learning. This is work that I am really passionate about and I have a lot of training in, but the other staff at the organization I was working with had hardly any training, and it was really new to them. So we all were coming to it with different levels of experience and expertise. But continuing to learn together really helps to create a space where you can be innovative. There's constantly new perspectives coming out about how to relate to one another more effectively. So we at the time had a DEI consultant that we worked with for 2 years. And so we would continue to do trainings. And then as we learned, we would go back to our strategic plan and update it to reflect the things that we were learning. And so if we have time, if you have a type of organization that you're looking to implement equity work in, put it in the chat and the questions, and when we come back to that section of the talk, we can sort of brainstorm how you might implement some of these strategies for your organization. Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for your talk. This is really, really interesting, really passionate that you already have experience in implementing that. That is very, very insightful and very, very rich. Yeah. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we will go with the next speaker. So Mark, and you can introduce him, Sara.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Our next speaker is Mark Barrett. Mark is the curator of the Woodbridge Tide Mill Museum, the only tide mill work and producing flour in the entire UK. He has 5 years of experience in the museum industry in the UK, and alongside my usual job of being curator, and with a wealth of experience in autism, accessibility, and inclusion work for the museum sector. He also worked with various partners, including the National Trust, the University of Leicester, Cornwall Museums Partnership, and National Gallery of Scotland. And the topic of his talk is Autistic Curating.
Lovely. Thank you for that introduction, Sara, and it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking here today. I've got to say, preparing up to this, hearing from so many of you guys, inspirational speakers, and all the ideas you shared, but in particular, such beautiful presentations that I don't even have a presentation. So and especially after following straight after Chris, who I've got to say was brilliant in what she was saying, very interesting. So with that being said, I just got to hope that you find me interesting enough to keep listening to me without any sort of visuals or anything. But yeah, brilliant. So so as Anna introduced me, I'm based in the UK, not too far from London, and I've been working in the museum industry for a good many years in the UK, especially on the subject of EDI, but more specifically around autism and neurological disabilities. And I mean, I don't know the awareness that goes out there, but if you know anything about autism, it's often, it's a considered disability, but it's an invisible disability. So it's a lot more neurological, and it tends to be about how someone sees the world differently and how they interact. People with autism don't interact as well, and various other aspects. But it's the thing with autism is that it's a condition where it impacts our life, especially growing up, and how we negotiate the world around us, because there's various unspoken, especially in British culture, there's a lot that's said that is not said verbally, and so that makes life tricky. But at the same time, people who have autism think differently. They are able, often on the high end of the IQ scale, and it's often said that some of the greatest people, like Albert Einstein, and who have had a level of autism. So just to give some context there, I'm more than happy to chat more about in general. But what I will say is the work I'm going to talk to you all about today is actually on my dissertation topic, which, as titled, Autistic Curating. And I quite like to hear how earlier Anna referenced her dissertation, and specifically Richard Sandel, because that's exactly what I'm doing now. So yeah, I mean, the first thing that is worth saying is the context to all of this is that basically in the UK there is an expectation of museums to a certain extent with EDI. And to be more specific, when it comes to museum accreditation, which is basically every museum to be a functioning and regulated museum has to pass accreditation standards, and that's controlled by the National Arts Body, which is a NGO, Arts Council England. What I wanted to do is just very quickly read out that when it comes to accreditation, all museums in the UK are expected to have a policy when it comes to accessibility and how people, access your collections, your buildings and your sites. So that's the legality or regularity, the regulation, but also they have to have an access plan. So this is more of a practical guidance that every museum has to have plans to maintain and improve, and I quote, the physical, sensory and intellectual access to your collections. And so with that in mind, I don't think that goes far enough, and especially, and I mean, I won't talk for physical disabilities, but you often think that if you have a physical disability, it's putting in a ramp for a wheelchair or a guide dog for someone who's blind. You know what I mean? But when it comes to having neurological disabilities, I think there's not enough clarification, or museums don't go far enough, either because it's unclear or they're not obliged to do much more than the minimum. And so this is what I really wanted to explore in both my EDI work, but also in my research. And I found in doing this, if I could describe it as brief as possible, I looked into sociological work when it comes to how disability models work. And to give you a short version, please do some research, more research on the models of disability. It's quite interesting. But the medicalized model, it's a parallel between the medical model and the social model of disability, where the medicalized model basically is framed by the clinicians, the doctors, and it's all about the person having the disability themselves, and in short, being their problem. When it comes to the social model of disability, which has been started to be framed in the last 30 years, thanks to political activists in disability and whatnot, the social model very much rests on being a social construct, so that the people who are, so that society is disabled, not the individual, creating a more equitable world in which everyone, regardless of ability, can get around. And so the whole point of that is it's the environment that needs tackling, not ad hoc, not the person that needs providing for. But when it comes to invisible disabilities and you know, things like autism, neurological, there is often the question mark of what could that mean for the social model, especially when the question of autism being a disability is a bit fractious with the community, because it's also a way of life now. And I'm 28 myself, and I was diagnosed with autism when I was 4, when there wasn't a lot, only the clinicians were sort of diagnosing, and that's all that was known about it. So I'm the first generation of young adults which do have the agency to be able to talk about autism and to frame autism. And so in light of this, through using this social model and applying it to museum work, I coined this term, and it's become the subject of being an autistic curator, or autistic curating as a discipline, or if you like, a sub-discipline of curating. And in this sense, I want to encourage a more representational view and to reconstruct the autistic narrative in the museum, the gallery space, and, you know, in the contemporary art scene. And to put my dissertation short, we look at various approaches that museums in the UK have done. I remember Ariana, I think, said about, I was quite happy to hear from her to say London museums have done a lot when it comes to disability access. And while that's true, there's a million more initiatives outside of London. I won't go into that, but so while these individual programs exist that are autistic friendly, that's brilliant that these museums are thinking about it. But are they far enough? Are they good enough? I mean, we spoke about the metrics before, and if you talked, it doesn't measure up to do well enough. And I think the problem is that these programs is the way autism access, inclusion, diversity is approached in museums is autism is to be catered for a reasonable adjustment, a fix, as in we put on an event for the autistic community, we've put a ramp in for wheelchair users. So I developed this framework, and the framework basically considers that the difficulties in being able to pin down exactly what the autistic community needs, coupled with the fact that that if you know anything about autism, every person with autism is as unique as the rest. It's not a one person. Like, you look at me and you heard, I told you about social interactions, social difficulties, and you're thinking, this guy's like talking on the international conference. He has no interaction problems or whatnot. But the short answer, it's complicated, and that's probably part of the reason is that because the autistic narrative has been missing, people like me, we are the first generation that are able to define autism as is seen from our own perspectives, not from the doctor's perspective or the the psychologist's perspective, from our perspectives. And what we say is autism is not a disability. It's a unique culture in of itself. And it has like any culture, it has a rich artistic history. If you look at, writing, art, in fact, art, we are here to talk about contemporary art. And you will find a million autistic artists out there who are, which is subscribes very much to the ODBK's organization. So it's really amazing to be speaking here and to be working with David and everyone else, because the mission, the vision can really align to what I'm talking about. So without too much theory, let's get into practice. This framework is to set out a vision of the ideal autistic curator. And that doesn't just mean you have to be a curator. I mean, I'm a curator, but we talk about everyone who has autism or a neurological disability. They all identify differently, so bear that in mind. But between autistic curators, artists, researchers, professional museums, professionals, galleries, everyone who works and has autism, being able to create not just programs that deliver, an accommodation for a set of people, but empowered programs that actually demonstrate what we go through, what our culture is, because it's been made quite clear that if you compare, and hopefully this comes out right, if you compare a community like the Black and ethnic minority community and the narratives around decolonization, museum programming has been on those topics, have been about getting the narratives of those cultures, about exploring people from marginalized groups and how they think, their art, but it hasn't for the autistic community, partly because we haven't been diagnosed or aware for as long as other communities, but now we are, and now is the time for us to really, as an international community, potentially of people that have autism or neurological disabilities, to get together and form these things. And it's talking and to focus this into the discussion and to the topics of the ODBK and this conference. It's the I think at the beginning it was quite interesting to hear from Monica. Sorry, I had to write names down about I think monitoring how inclusive curating works, and I heard from others about the metrics that you have to go through, and I can see my framework of how creating a new type of discipline in curating, of being a autistic curator as well as an autistic artist, So I was thinking at the beginning of the reflections David put forward about curatorial decentralization of power and decision making. Well, I mean, people, I'd like to say, like me, I'd like to be in a position to make decisions, but people that have neurological disabilities becoming in those positions to start forming more and more narratives in a kind of framework and network that can connect and put across what the sort of goals in order to create a better world in which not only do people, I think we've got to the stage where people understand autism. In the UK anyway, I can't speak for anywhere else, but people still see it as a condition, no matter how complex. We want to put across that there are so many interesting narratives our community can create, so much that we can do as individuals because of our autism, not despite our autism. And on the approach of representation, contemporary artists, I'd sign up to that in a switch. So yeah, I think that's pretty much how everything I wanted to say. That I know that's I hope that wasn't too much of a lecture, and I hope I hammered down some of those points. But yeah, I'd love, this is work that I think I'm going to progress over time, do more work and advocate more on a grander level. And I'd especially love to work with more and more from from the museum and galleries community, especially hearing Monica's from earlier saying working with disabled groups, and I think Ariana, everyone, ideas about working with groups. And yeah, it's been especially interesting that I'm talking now at the end of day 2, having heard everything from day 1 and the beginning of day 2. So maybe call that cheating, but I took it in and thought that of all the ways that we could enact the vision that this conference hopes to do, but especially define the metrics in which we do that, then I think that as a school of thought ourselves, this is something that the autistic community, with all its diversity, from professors, from studying professors, researchers, curators, artists, that we could get involved and create. So yeah, I want to end sort of on paraphrasing my the conclusion of my dissertation, that basically the autistic curator wants to become a new type of curator for the 21st century, to influence so much more than just in basic museum practices, but also to put across narratives that I highlighted in this talk, but also to engage in conversations that are relevant to contemporary society and seeks to improve the way that people see autistic people, but also engage and get involved in the discussion. And contemporary art spaces, museums and galleries are the places that we do this. But on top of that, our experience, perspectives, and way of seeing things can have so much potential in how we govern the art world and our leadership. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that was okay, because I understand.
It's totally okay, Mark. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your talk. Yeah, this is very, very interesting. Your work in the mission and what you are being developing in UK. Yeah, with the museum, your experience. Yeah. So now we go to the questions, the Q&A. Yeah. If someone want to put a question, but yeah, I have
In
here.
the public section, Chris said, I love this framework for curating Mark. Changing the curational perspective is really key. I am for effective change. And yeah.
I have a question for Chris. Yeah. Chris, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. I have a question. I would like to ask. I would like to question what will be the biggest challenge that you face when you are start to implementing all this strategy, and in some specific, for example, in the diversity.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge for landmarks in that particular case was getting everyone on the same page about why it was important. The staff there and I had really different perspectives. I did my graduate studies at the same university. I was actually still a PhD student when I was working in this role. So I had a really different perspective on what was important to do on campus than the other folks that were working in the organization. I was a lot more connected to undergraduate students and sort of the politics of the university campus. So it took a lot of reframing to help get people on board to make these changes and to actually want to do that, to want to do all the work, because it's so much work and it's really uncomfortable, especially for white folks that are faced with like having to deal with their own white fragility. It's a very vulnerable thing to have to kind of look inside yourself and find the ways that you might be biased or actively discriminating against other people. But that's absolutely part of the work. So I think that was the hardest part of it. And then the rest of it was really fun, still challenging, but I think that part is the part that you really have to be careful to hold space for people, but also to find ways to hold yourselves accountable.
Thank you so much. I think I have the same question for Mark. I mean, about the challenge. What would be the challenge that the harder challenge that you faced when trying to curate or to implement this creating idea in the autistic community, in the autistic artists, or in the museums?
I was sorry. I want to add to that question. Actually, I was curious about this too. Isn't it like harder to reach to autistic audience because they have like autism? I mean, isn't it harder to connect with them and stuff? Like, how did you manage that challenge?
Yeah, well, firstly, some good questions. So I'm guessing about the challenges, but also Sara was a bit more specific about challenges, considering the nature of the audiences I'm talking about. Well, the first thing I'll say is I think conferences like this are probably the whole representation of the challenges, or in short, there's a lot of challenges. But yeah, I think that I suppose there's no sort of shortcut, is there? If you want to create change or you want to push forward for better EDI, and what I've set forward is no different. And I mean, what Chris said is, I mean, she faced her own similar challenges, which sort of do resonate, whichever type of EDI you talk about. But it gets interesting for me, or difficult, because I always get this sense that when I introduce what I do or try to get people on board, they're like, "Oh, brilliant, that's great," and they'll even go as far as, I don't know, inviting me to talk or whatever, and it leaves me thinking, you want it, but are you is it really embedded? You know, because when things are all happy and going well, it's very easy to say we're doing some good work to bring on board change or equality. But what about when it's not going so well? Because I'm not saying, because as I said before, with autism comes the struggles of understanding facial expressions, you know, non-verbal sort of communications and tones in voices that could lead to problems like that, you know, people take against me because of that, and I don't understand why. So I'd say that, especially, I won't go into detail as to keep confidentiality, but recently I worked with an organization for a long time and was almost their ambassador for autism. But I went, but then they were very happy about the work I did and got around, but then some problems started, which, you know, I won't go into, but the sort of problems they were raising with me, I really misunderstood because there were things that are like how to understand if a person doesn't want to talk to you anymore, or you're having a conversation that's not welcome. These were all sort of things to me that didn't quite understand, and but I was, you know, it was quite a bad experience, and so long story short, I don't work with them anymore. But the point I'm trying to make is, yes, take on board, do some good work, but also be willing to consider access, inclusion for the autistic community for when it doesn't go so well, because it's, you know, some interactions can with people on the autistic spectrum can be contrary to what society expects us to do. I'm not saying give us a free pass, not at all, because there's got to be a line. We can all agree there's got to be a maximum in which you can't tolerate certain behaviors, but being able to understand when it's all negative is the true test of accessibility than when it's being able to understand when it's all positive. And I'll say, just specifically to what you asked, Sara, with when it comes to audiences, is Well, firstly, I'd say in terms of audiences, I don't see it as just the autistic community. I see it as our audiences, or at least the target of autistic curating, or my framework is everyone, because the point is trying to portray or readdress and reconstruct the narratives of what people think autism is and what people don't quite get or understand when they meet autistic people, myth busting, if you like. But then, in terms of the autistic audiences themselves, this is why I want to recruit. Well, not literally recruit. I don't have that, but to get on board a network of professionals which are increasing in number, especially in museum studies, to be able to engage in that process. Because if the whole point of having the narrative from people with first-hand experience is hopefully being able to address the rest of the community. So, I mean, in much the same way, if you want to, maybe I'm wrong, but if you want to address certain parts of the marginalized community, then you go to them and work, co-curate with them, is what I'm saying.
Great, Mark. Thank you so much. Yeah. So now I think, I don't know if there are more questions. Not. Then we will declare finished the third session of the speakers from today. Yeah. And I have to, give it a big thank you to Chris and to Mark for their lectures and for your talk. Yeah. Very valuable for the conference, and we hope we'll see us again, and to keep in contact. Yeah,
definitely. My LinkedIn I put on the thing. If
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all. And we see you tomorrow. We invite you to participate and to hear the lectures and participate in the debate for tomorrow. Thank you so much.
David. Thank you, Sara. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye, guys.